Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Second Take Cinema, coming at you from the glorious Impala Films headquarters in sunny Southend-on-Sea. As always, I'm your host, Jamie Evans, joined by Rory Jocelyn.
Hello, everyone.
And today we are going back to the 1950s, back to black and white, to watch the first ever film role of Mr. Marlon Brando. Today, we give a second take to The Men. The Men is a 1950 American drama film and is the first movie to star Marlon Brando. It is directed by Fred Zinnemann, written by Carl Foreman, produced by Stanley Kramer. I do not have budget information for this film, I'm afraid, or box office information, as we tend not to with older films.
Yeah. Do you think the director, when they're on set, he would call a cinnamon roll?
Zinnemann.
Oh.
Zinnemann.
Cinnamon roll.
The film was banned in the United Kingdom.
Yeah?
Because of a scene in which Dr. Brock speaks to a group of wives, mothers, fiancées, and girlfriends of patients.
That's at the beginning. Why is that banned in the UK, though? There's no swearing or anything in there.
The subject of having children, and by implication sexual relations, with a paraplegic husband is discussed, and Brock tells them that the ability to beget children varies in individual cases, but is unlikely overall, which is actually medically inaccurate, I think, which is why it was banned, I think.
Right.
It was basically saying crippled people can't have children.
Well, it depends on whether it affects the Todge, I suppose. Bear in mind, at this point, artificial insemination was probably not very much a thing in 1950.
Yeah.
But, yeah, okay. But, I mean, banning it seems a bit silly. You could just cut the scene.
We used to ban all sorts, didn't we? Yeah. You couldn't cut that scene. That's half the fucking film. 10 fucking minutes.
It wasn't that long.
Out of a 87-minute runtime. Upon release, The Men received generally positive reviews, particularly for its screenplay. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 77%, with Bosley Crowther of the New York Times giving the film a positive review, writing, "Stern in its intimations of the terrible consequences of war, this film is a haunting and affecting as well as a rewarding drama to have at this time." Variety also gave a favourable review and noted, "Producer Stanley Kramer turns to the difficult cinematic subject of paraplegics, so expertly treated as to be sensitive, moving, and yet, withal, entertaining and earthly humoured." Brando's screen debut received much praise, and The Hollywood Reporter claimed him as an important new star in the Hollywood horizon.
Right on that one.
Variety saw it differently, saying Brando fails to deliver with the necessary sensitivity and inner warmth which would transform an adequate portrayal into an expert one. Slight speech impediment which sharply enhanced his streetcar role jars here. His supposed college graduate depiction is consequently not completely convincing. The film was reissued by the National Telefilm Associates under the title Battle Stripe.
Oh,
Were you aware of this?
No, I was not.
Yes, it also was released under the title Battle Stripe.
That's actually a bad name for it. I mean,
It is.
The Men is not a great name, I'll be honest, to begin with, but Battle Stripe, there's no...
It sounds like it's a war film, doesn't it? And other than the opening, it's not.
Yeah, the only bit... it's literally that small snippet. Other than that, it's about disability.
Yeah. Carl Foreman was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Writing, Story and Screenplay, and the National Board of Review placed the film on its annual list of the 10 best movies of the year.
Interesting. I wouldn't know enough of the 1950s movie set to know if it is definitely should be considered one of
Yeah.
the best top 10. I like this film.
Okay, so The Men. This is one that was added to the list by your good self, Rostifer.
Yep.
So do you want to tell the audience a bit about how you first encountered The Men?
I had never heard of this film before, and I was looking around a second-hand shop called CEX. Anyone in the UK who knows what that is, whoop, whoop. Basically, I was looking in there just because I was bored round town. I just had a haircut. I was looking in there. There was a Blu-ray for this film called The Men. I'd never heard of it before. Marlon Brando's first appearance is written on there, and I was like, that looks cool. I've not heard of this before. Looked up reviews. Apparently, it was a very, very good film. So I was like, give it a punt. It was like 12 quid. I thought, fuck it, I'll give it a punt. So I bought it, took it home, and watched it. That was about 2 months ago. So I've not. This isn't one where I've got like treasured memories from way back when. This is brand new to me, really. This is only my second watch through of it. But when I watched it, I remember incredibly liking it a lot. Don't get me wrong, it's not a perfect film, and we will get to what I think goes wrong with the film and ways that maybe the film could have been better. I was more critical of it in my second viewing. But yeah, overall, I still think it holds up as a good drama film. So I thought, well, if we'd meant to be doing interesting films, it definitely counts. The first Marlon Brando movie, that's big enough in itself, considering the heft of that guy's name, being about disability after World War II, talking about struggles from paraplegia. These aren't things that are usual conversation pieces in films that you get in shit like Man of Steel. This is an actual movie. So, in that sense, I wanted to see what your thoughts would be of it and go from there.
Okay. So, just to sum up for people who haven't seen it, which I'm guessing is probably a lot of people considering the age of the film.
Considering I hadn't heard of it until I just saw its box in CEX.
The film is set in a VA hospital for the majority of the film's runtime.
Veterinary Army, isn't it? VA.
Veterans Army.
Veterans Army, sorry, yeah.
Veterinary.
That's vets, isn't it?
Yeah, this film's about cats and dogs, did you know? Marlon Brando's actually voicing a golden retriever.
Brando. Marlon Brando.
Ruby, Ruby, Roo.
That's a crossover of Scooby-Doo that they've yet to make.
Yes.
And they've done everything else.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of men in there who have been crippled in various ways in the war. Marlon Brando plays a guy who basically, is it a full year he's been there, they say?
Something like that. They do mention it.
And he's basically in denial, refusing to move on with his life, has basically abandoned his fiancée.
Yeah, he's gotten depressed, hasn't he? Because he was as we found out later in the film, he was basically a American football star, like doing, not a star, but he was leading somewhere. The war kicked in, he went to war, got shot in the spine. Now he's been paralysed for about a year, and he doesn't want anything to do with his fiancée or anyone else because he's just sitting there crying to himself, basically in his room and throwing little tizzy fits. Kind of understandable.
The film is basically about the struggles of the Doctor to help these people adjust to their new life, the different ways that the individual men approach this new life, and the different ways that society treats them as they attempt to enter this new life. Where shall we start?
I think we should start with how the film introduces itself. Outside of the fact that we get this monologue from Brando about having been shot in the spine, not really feeling it or understanding it at the time. We actually say that the scene that potentially got it banned from the BBC was the introduction of paraplegia by the Doctor to the mums. But realistically, this scene is written so that we as an audience can understand what paraplegia is and how it affects the men that have it.
Actually, yeah, you're right. I'm glad this is actually a good scene to start with. Because I was watching this scene and I was like, okay, what's the reason for including this? Is it because they're worried that people don't understand what paraplegia is?
You've got to remember as well, 1950.
Yeah.
Not modern day. This
Yeah.
wasn't designed for audiences our age who understand what paraplegia is a little bit more.
Yeah. I'm not necessarily convinced that they didn't understand it then. Not by 1950, after 2 world wars have been fought. But I've heard, and I don't know how true this is just something I read online, the ending of Psycho 10 years later is a parody of this scene, apparently.
Oh, interesting. I
When-
need to watch. I'm
when
looking
the-
forward to us watching Psycho again
When
at
the
some point.
doctor does the overly laborious explanation of what schizophrenia is,
Right.
and he's going on, and it's all very tongue-in-cheek, and it's sort of deliberately drony. Apparently, it's a commentary on this movie.
I mean, it could be. This scene does go on a little bit too long.
Yeah.
I like the idea that they establish it because I think for its time it was important, and it's still kind of important now that because it means that we know what problems these characters are likely to face going forward, and that the Doctor is not ignorant of that fact. Even if, to be fair, the wives and fiancés are ignorant, but they weren't to know until this point. The whole thing is to enlighten them. It is a little too long, so I do appreciate. I would have cut that down a bit. However, on a modern context, a modern audience would probably watch this and go, yeah, okay, I get it. Yeah, crippled, get it. I know what that is. But there are modern versions of this where films such as Split, the film Split, talks about dissociative disorder and dissociative identity disorder specifically. And it explains it. Now, in the future, give it 50, 60, 70 years. I mean, we're 70 years from this movie.
Yeah.
So 70 years on from Split, no one's going to need to have dissociative identity disorder explained to them. We're going to know what that is. So
it's not what's shown in Split.
No. But at the same time, it's going to be one of those things where if someone 70 years later watches it, they're going to be like, yeah, why are you explaining this to me? It's DID, I get it. But to us now, it's not that straightforward. I'm taking the paraplegia of this to be like DID is for our modern society. So I forgive it on that front. Plus, I have to say, the Doctor is fantastic.
Yeah, this is he's one of the better actors in it. It's a good performance, and he's suitably charismatic for the role.
Yeah.
I like the bit where he's like, forget the word walk exists. It's not in your vocabulary anymore.
Yeah, because there's so many people that try and push and go, well, if you just try hard enough, if you just keep trying. When I had my bike accident, I can't kneel on my left knee. I'll never be able to kneel on my left knee again. But when I was in a previous relationship, someone in that relationship was like, well, if you keep trying, maybe you'll be able to do it. It's like, I literally, because of where the
metal rod is.
Well, no, it's not the metal rod. It's the other one. It's because the tendon that goes over the patella is in the wrong place. Right. So when I kneel down, my knee screams at me as if I'm about to snap it. Right. So I literally can't. It hurts too much to kneel down on that knee. But it's like, oh, well, if you keep trying, blah, blah, blah. No, it's gone. Like, there are sometimes people in relationships that even when they understand that's a trauma has happened to their partner, don't want to believe that they have to accommodate for it permanently.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you've broken your leg, but once it's fixed, you're all good again. It's like, no, that's not how it works necessarily.
Some things are unfixable.
Yeah, and in this case, the trauma is on the spine, where they're permanently disabled from the waist down. But even Brando's wife, the main female character of the film, is almost, for quite a bit of the film, is like, oh, if you just try, and he's not helping because he gives her false hope as well.
He gives her false hope.
Yeah, but so they're kind of both playing each other off on that.
She's more than prepared to accept him when she first comes in, and he keeps going, oh, well, actually, I think I felt a little twitch in it. And...
Yeah. They both play off each other on that, though, because he wants to feel better for her more than for himself, I think. But at the same token, she has been duped by him saying, oh, this feeling back. I think it's an interesting piece. I think it's a necessary scene. Just needs to be a little bit trimmed.
Yeah.
My favourite scene, though, is what happens next.
Oh, okay, because this is a bit I don't like. Go on. Is this where he walks through the whole hospital?
Yes, it's the best scene in the film.
Needs to be cut.
No.
Yeah, it's awful.
No,
it's
you
terrible.
do not understand the film if you think this scene needs to be cut.
For starters, half the actors look at the camera. Directly at the camera.
I didn't notice that.
One of them does it. And to be fair, he's not I looked it up. He's not an actor.
Angel?
No. This is my problem with the scene. Half the characters we stand and he talks about don't go on to be characters in the movie.
Right.
So you don't need it. Why are we doing it? Fine, do it with Angel and Erdman and all them lot.
Yeah.
Why are we doing it with characters who are not in the movie? And what it was, I looked it up, it was because they wanted the authenticity. So it was filmed in an actual VA hospital.
Yeah. And
they wanted the authenticity of including actual VAs.
But there is some word, there is some back and forth, even with those who don't become characters like Erdman, etc. Later on. There is wordplay with some of those, and I thought that was cool because it's a Doctor who's having a natural and almost playful communication with his patients, because he knows that it's doom and gloom. You're paralyzed forever. You know, your legs are fucked forever. But it's not a negative scene. The scene is overwhelmingly uplifting. It works with what they call the Kurosawa curve. It starts on the positive motion, which will then come down to tragedy later. It's actually a very good scene. And actually, I think it's very well written.
I liked his interactions with Leo, as we said, Erdman's character, an Angel, and all them. And I didn't think you needed all the others. You just needed that. I didn't need people keep looking at the camera.
See, I didn't see that, but okay, fair enough.
Yeah, one of them's real bad. It's one of them because it's literally the camera's in close up on the guy,
right?
And he literally turns and looks at the camera. I think it's the guy whose butt cheeks have been blown off, and they're looking at his butt. I think it's him.
Right.
He literally looked straight at the camera. I was like, dude, come on.
Fair enough. I think that's going to have to be a disagreement point between us, because honestly, that scene is I think a scripted work of art.
Right.
Because it introduces a very dark theme, and unlike the previous scene, which was basically almost preaching, this is what disability is, this is what you're going to have to get used to. Yeah. This is, they're still human. There's no pity. They're not sitting there going, oh, these poor waifs laying in bed, destroyed, forgotten, blah. It's not that at all. They're still human, they're still playful, they're still, Erdman's character, Leo, is the best example of that. And he's actually got a bit of a tragic arc himself with his parents later on. Yeah, it establishes the Kurosawa curve perfectly, in that we're starting off on a positive and now we're going to dip to the negative.
Yeah.
Also, I hasten to add, there's also a brief blink and you'll miss it appearance of DeForest Kelley, who was famously Dr. McCoy in Star Trek. 16 years before he was in Star Trek, he was a doctor in The Men.
And it's so blinking you miss it that I knew it was there and still missed it.
Oh, really? He does have one line. Very short.
You told me and I missed it.
You missed him?
Yeah, and then it weren't until you put the screenshot on Facebook. I was like, oh, that's where he was.
Yeah, it is very short.
Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor.
Yeah, so following that, we're then introduced to Marlon Brando as he is post-wound.
Yes.
I'll let you talk, because I've talked a lot about that previous scenes.
That's all right. So, annoyingly, this is where having watched things so far in advance might backfire on us, because I've actually forgotten exactly what happens next.
He goes in to see Brando.
My next note that I've thought was worth noting down is when Brando first gets put in with the rest of them. Oh,
okay, so this is prior to that. So the Doctor goes in to see Brando in his own room. He's got his own side room.
Oh, no, I'm wrong. Sorry. I've got one about the scene we've just talked about.
Oh, okay.
There was a line, so there's a character that we meet is another character I did like in the film, Norm.
Okay, yes.
And Norm's got
He's the captain. He goes through the whole film, doesn't he? He's the one who gets the girlfriend. He's the one who gets the girlfriend who betrays him eventually. Yeah. He had a line that I quite liked it enough that I've written it down, where he goes, I don't want to be rehabilitated, readjusted, reconditioned, or re-anything. I don't want to take my proper place in society. Yeah.
And I just thought that was, I think there's a lot of different ways you can interpret that line.
Yeah.
You can interpret it in the way of, much like Brando has done, which is these men feel like they're not whole anymore and are voluntarily taking themselves out of society. You can interpret it more as a self-protection thing of, I know society won't accept me, so fuck them, I'm going to go my own way.
With him, it does kind of lead to that with him, because before he gets the girlfriend, he's telling the others there's no point, women don't like men like us. They want complete men. We might as well take ourselves out. He actually states that, I think, to Leo. Right. He mentions in one of the scenes that, there's no point, women don't look for people like us. Which is why when he then gets the girlfriend, he's going to go on a date. They're like, hang on, you got a girlfriend? Like, the reason they're surprised is because he was basically doomsaying about the idea of getting girlfriends. Yeah. Which is why then it's doubly tragic when she then betrays him and runs off with his money.
But yeah, I thought that was a line worth noting down.
Yeah, it was a good line.
They then go to meet Brando in his room on his own, where he's being a Mardy mug. And this is where they reveal he's been there for a whole year.
Yeah.
And basically, isn't making any progress because he is holding himself back.
Yeah, because he doesn't
basically.
want to bother.
Yeah,
That's the point.
and he won't accept the truth, which is that his legs are gone,
Yeah,
basically.
he wants them to recover, but
And it's sort of as a punishment, isn't it, that Dr. Brock puts him in with everyone else?
yeah, because he keeps moping and being rude to the staff. So, well, let's see what happens if we stick him back with the others then. And they mock him.
Yeah, and he's obviously hoping that exposure to other people in the same situation will help Brando. I actually can't remember the character's name.
I don't know either.
I've just called him Brando all the way through my notes.
Let's just call him Brando, because
they're hoping Brando will sort of see that it is possible to live a normal life. And when they move him in, so this is where we get to a scene that I thought was good.
Okay.
Which is when they first move Brando into the room.
Yes.
And there's this really well-directed scene where you've got Brando's bed here. Directly opposite him is Angel, who I haven't written down who played him. It's something Gerardo, Anthony Gerardo, maybe.
Let me find that out while you keep going.
Who actually was not an actor. He was an actual legit paraplegic.
Arthur Gerardo.
Absolutely shredded as well.
Oh, man, he's ripped.
Then next to Angel is Leo, Tony, by... what's his face? Richard Erdman. And opposite Erdman, i.e. next to Brando, is Norm.
Yes, played by Jack Webb.
And what I liked in this scene was basically everything starts to get to Brando. They're all sort of winding him up.
Yeah,
and as
Leo turns his music up really loud, doesn't
and
he?
as he's winding him up, the music gradually comes up and up and up, directly in correspondence with how frustrated Marlon Brando is getting.
Yeah.
Until he absolutely snaps.
Yeah.
And he's like, turn it off. And he throws his water jug, doesn't he, at the radio.
Then Norm comes along and goes, I was a captain, I'm ordering you to cool off. And then he pours loads of water on Marlon Brando. Yes.
I actually have not written another note until way, way, way later in it.
Okay.
Because I've not gotten another note now until Angel dies.
So... okay, so I don't have a lot of notes on the story, because let's get the story beats out clear, and then we can talk about our feelings on certain scenes, rather than go beat by beat. Essentially, Marlon Brando gets... it's not Brando, is his name. But Brando's character gets inspired by the others, starts to try and pull himself together, reconnects with his lover, Ellen, I believe her name is.
Yep, she hunts him down.
Yep, and so he starts to build a relationship with her. There's a few scenes, like when they, as you mentioned, when they go out for dinner, he feels kind of awkward because everyone's staring at him at the dinner, and he's just like, I want to get out of here, you know. And also they rush him into a table while there's a queue. And it's like, oh, no, we've got to get him because he's disabled. And he doesn't want the additional, help for that. So there's a lot, there's little bits like that where it talks about the experience of living as a paraplegic and trying to live with a paraplegic as well. And it eventually gets to a point where they get married, but then the night they come home from the wedding, he decides he wants to stand at the altar for the wedding. He manages to just about do it, but he does have a slight tumble.
Yeah.
And then when they get home, all of a sudden something changes in Ellen. And she, instead of, I'm fighting to be with my husband, this wonderful man that I love, all of a sudden she just sees the disability and she starts acting weird. But he doesn't help either, because he also...
Yeah, we'll get to that, because my interpretation of that scene's completely different, funnily enough. So we'll get to that later.
So essentially they have a falling out. Brando goes off the wire. He gets drunk, crashes a car, and eventually has to basically be talked down by Dr. Brock into going back to his wife and going, look, you've got a chance and you're wasting it based on your own pride. That's the basic beats of the film. Within that, there's a couple of moments for other characters, and I want to mention those first because
should we do all the side characters first and then finish with the main plot?
Yeah, because I'm being honest, I think Brando's character was the wrong one to focus on.
Yes, I would totally agree with that.
So Angel's a great character. Very well performed, considering, as you say, the guy wasn't an actor. But he does his job really well. Ripped, as you say, shredded as hell, can climb that rope like nobody's business, incredibly fit and healthy. Everyone is having a laugh with Angel. He's a very positive, upbeat character in the film, until the point all of a sudden he gets, is it meningitis in the spine? Something happens, he gets meningitis, he goes downhill and he dies within like 24 hours all of a sudden. And it's like, that's another knock to Brando's character again when he things seem to be going positively. It's like that guy put in all the effort. He had the right attitude. He was shredded. He didn't let anything get him down about being a paraplegic. And he was planning to go home and spend time with his family. He had his whole life plotted out for what he would do, and he did everything right, and he lost to the disability because of a roll
of the dice, basically.
Yeah, he did everything right and lost.
And
that was such a great, tragic moment.
Yeah, and that impacts, more importantly, arguably, that knocks Dr. Brock as well.
Yes.
Who then, I've put, obviously because I work in a hospital, absolutely breaks protocol here. He has a go at them all.
Yeah,
doesn't he? He snaps about how they're
miracle workers.
Yeah, and about how they're not helping themselves and things like that. But arguably, that's him, much like how Brando is putting everything on getting his legs to work again.
Yeah,
that's arguably Dr. Brock is putting too much on himself.
Yeah, he couldn't. They already said there was no way he could have guessed out the meningitis and things like that.
Yeah.
So there was no way he could have stopped it. But at the same time, he takes the blame because he did everything, as did the patient, and he still lost.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic... I really thought that was... To say a highlight is a horrible thing to say because it's a tragic moment, but it's a brilliant tragic moment. Also, the character of Norm, played by Jack Webb, he has, as we stated earlier, he is kind of slightly more negative. He's kind of between... He's not quite at Brando's level at the beginning, but he does have this negative vibe of, we've just got to accept that women won't like us, blah, blah, blah. He's got this very negative outlook. And then he gets a girlfriend, starts going on dates with her, and his attitude increases, and he's still like, he's a lot more private.
Yeah.
And then one day he comes back drunk and depressed, and it's because the woman that he was seeing stole...
Laverne.
Yeah, she steals all of his money and I think goes to America.
Canada.
They're
in America.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I've put here, Laverne robs Norm and flees to Canada.
Yeah, and he was obviously she was only dating him to rob him, basically to see what he was worth.
Well, she saw weakness, didn't she?
Yeah. And that's unfortunately, that never gets a positive turnaround. But overall, the actual script of that was very good. And again, it's another element of a paraplegic's potential journey after finding out that, they're never going to fully recover. Yeah. And then lastly, Leo.
Leo, yes. Who is very upbeat throughout.
Yeah, he's almost like the wisecracking comic character.
He's hiding his pain with the jokes, with the yucks. And he's big into horse gambling. That's what he's doing, isn't he? Gambling on horse races.
Yeah. But we find out that he's not had it perfect either because his dad comes to visit him, and his dad only clearly cares about coming and picking up and taking money from his son. Because he comes along and he goes, "Oh, where's Mum? Oh, she's, too busy or whatever." And then he gives him the money. He goes, "Oh, here you. I'm guessing you want this." And he goes, "Oh, thanks." And the dad has nothing to say.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Well, if you, you don't have to stay if you don't want to, Dad." And he goes, "Well, I've got, what it's like. I've got things to do, people to see," and just leaves. Doesn't want to spend time with his son. But his mum never turns up, and his dad doesn't really care to outside of taking his money.
Well, I mean, do we know his mum never turns up, or she just doesn't turn up this
it's
one
suggested.
time?
It's very much suggested in the scene. And it's certainly very obvious that the dad doesn't want to be there outside of getting money out of his son. So, you kind of... And I'll be honest, this is where I'm going to state it. This should have been the main character.
Yeah.
He's way more interesting, way more charismatic. I'm more interested in seeing him try and succeed than Brando. Yeah. Because he feels like, A, he wants to, but B, still gets all the bad breaks. Yeah. Actually, in this, I think he's very good. I think the problem he has is that I don't think the script he's given is very great. But also, the big issue I have with Brando's performance in this, and it's difficult to... It's kind of awkward because I don't know how you'd fix it other than the script, really. And again, he's the wrong character to focus on. He's not particularly sympathetic. So this story would work better. And he plays the role perfectly. But there's no sympathetic grounding to him.
Brando doesn't have a sympathetic quality to him.
No, and
some people have it, some people don't.
yeah, and when you watch it, you're like, this guy's either just moaning like a bitch, which I kind of get because he's paralyzed, etc. But even when he's on his upswing, he's always just pissy and grumpy and shitty about people. When he goes to the restaurant, he doesn't like people looking at him, fine. And then he goes and hangs around with the other paraplegics, and then he's just having a pop at them. And it's like, dude, will you ever fucking cheer up? Like, I can't imagine either that it's just the depression, because I get the vibe from Ellen that he's always been this way.
Yeah, he's never been a happy person.
No, and it kind of makes me not particularly interested in seeing him happy, because I'm like, mate, I don't think there's any scenario where you would be happy. Like, not truly happy, like, sort of buzzing off the screen, like, fucking, yes, I got my walk, I can walk again, or, you know, it'd be more like, yeah, now I can walk. But the other guys, they can't. Well, it's like, oh, stop putting a downer on everything. That's kind of the vibe I get from his character in this. And even in The Wild One. Now, The Wild One is arguably, along with Streetcar Named Desire, the film that made Brando famous. And it's certainly, in terms of the biker circles, the one, because it is the first big-name biker movie, and it is the first big-name solo Brando act, pretty much. And he's not the best thing in that either. Lee Marvin is better. Lee Marvin's character is so much more fun. Lee Marvin's character is in that film for 10 minutes. Yeah. He is the most interesting and best character in it. For all 10 minutes he's in it. The rest of it is focusing on Johnny, which is Brando's character, trying to flirt with this girl and try and pull her. And you're like, he's a dickhead who's full of shit. Like, he's just too cool for school, quote unquote. But Lee Marvin's character calls him out on his bullshit, and I'm like, I'm with that guy. And he's more fun. So he's never been the best. He's never really been the greatest performance in the films I've seen him in.
Yeah.
But he always gives a reliably decent performance in the films that I've seen him in, and he's good in this. Yeah. But I'm sorry, if you were to put him in a character like Leo, make Marlon Brando play the part of Leo, for example, it would ruin the character. Yeah. Because he just doesn't have the quality you need to give a shit.
Yeah, he doesn't have a likeable nature to his personality, I don't think.
No.
Another line that I thought worth writing down was when Brando is still trying to drive Ellen away.
Yes.
And it's really because of his own self-hatred and disappointment at his situation. She has this line where she says, Stop worrying about being fair to me and start being fair.
Yeah, and that is a decent comment, because he's not fair to her.
No.
He puts a lot on her, and he keeps trying to tell her to piss off, and that basically telling her that what her feelings are.
Yeah.
He does a lot of that, where it's like, you don't really care about me, you don't really want this, you don't want to be with me, you don't, and she's sitting there going, I want to be with you, I care about you. And it's like, it's not quite, but it's almost gaslighting.
Yeah. And then her parents echo a similar thing, don't they? Where they're like,
yeah,
look, you don't want to be with the wedding.
You don't want to be with a paralysed person, almost, is what they say. So, and that's the thing. He's echoing what he knows her parents would say, probably what he would say if his daughter was going to look at marrying a paraplegic.
Later on, there is a section that I remember getting really angry at this bit. Maybe I interpreted it wrong. It felt like the film wanted you to be on Brando and Leo's side, but I wasn't. A World War I vet comes up to speak to them.
Yes.
And they're World War II vets. And
he says he's a World War I vet.
Yeah.
I think is what the insinuation is meant to be.
Oh, okay.
I think he's one of those that's like, oh, you're one of our boys. You know, I used to be in the war, but he probably wasn't. He was probably a desk jockey or something like that.
Right, I didn't pick up on that then.
I don't think this film tells that makes that delineation very well.
No, I thought he was just a World War I vet, and they're petulant and disrespectful to him, and Brando even punches him. Yeah. And my interpretation of that was their Brando's sort of jealousy of almost, because they themselves can't see past their own disability, and it's almost, well, I went to war and got crippled. If you came back and you're still fine, then you must have not fought very hard, or you're not a real soldier, or something like that.
I also question some of it based on his age.
Right.
Like the guy's age that says that he's a World War I vet. Bear in mind, this was meant to be about 1950.
Yeah.
So the guy would have had to have been in his 50s, 60s.
He looked like he was in his 50s.
Did he, though? Like, you've got to remember,
Yeah.
did he look like he was in his 50s, 60s in 1950? Because people aged a lot more back then.
When I saw him, I thought he was in his 50s.
Yeah, it's possible. It's one of those scenes that, unfortunately, isn't very clear with its intentions. So I interpreted it because you're meant to be on the side of Leo and Marlon. And to be fair, if it was just Marlon on his own, I probably would have taken it the same way you did. It was the fact that Leo was being a bit shirty, and I was like, well, Leo's not been established as that kind of a character.
Yeah.
So I think it's meant to be that the World War One vet, quote unquote, is actually one of those clingers on. He was like, oh, I just joined World War One as it ended, so I'm technically a vet. And hey, I'm like you guys.
Yeah.
And it's that whole thing of I'm like you. And it's like, you're nothing like us because we actually saw action and got shot. But again, yeah. End of story. That scene should have been clearer.
So.
And again, more interesting of a scene if our focus was on Leo.
So I want to talk about what I felt about the film. I didn't like it. And I'm trying to give the film the benefit of the doubt of remembering that it was made a long time ago, and I'm obviously looking at it through a modern lens because, well, I'm incapable of not doing because I live now. And I was not alive in the 1950s. Yeah. Even my parents weren't alive in the 1950s.
No.
They weren't born till the 60s.
My dad was born in 52, so he was...
So even your dad weren't alive at this point. I'm going to read you, so for all the films that because to give the audience some inside baseball, I've just come back from 2 weeks away, and me and Rory have pre-watched a bunch of these films so we can do a recording. So for all of them, I've actually written a little bit at the end of all my notes, summing up my thoughts on the film.
That's a good idea.
And here's what here's what I wrote about this, and you might feel this is harsh.
Okay. Well, I can always just respond.
So I wrote... A clunky and shallow attempt to depict a man's struggle to accept help following a life-changing injury. The script, performance, and movie as a whole fails to adequately make the audience buy into the emotional weight of the narrative. The score is overbearing and really could have done with being toned down. That is a criticism I actually read in several reviews, that the score is overdone.
Oh, the use of the soundtrack.
Yeah. And then there's a line
that was kind of common in 50s movies, though, weirdly enough. They really like to bring in fucking
orchestras.
ultra-loud fucking orchestra at important moments.
And a phrase I loved that I wish I could take credit for, but I didn't come up with it. I got this from an analysis I read of The Men.
Okay.
Well, so this wasn't of The Men. It was an analysis of that producer we mentioned, Stanley Kramer, I think it was.
Yeah.
Apparently all of his films suffer this problem, according to this analysis I read. They used apparently all of his films pick what is agreeably a serious issue to forefront, in this case, the treatment of war vets and paraplegia.
Yep.
But apparently all his films are about issues that are big.
Okay.
But it prioritizes going the issue over being an actual cinematic movie. And the phrase they used was cinematically inert.
Interesting.
And I did feel that with this film. There's large chunks of it where it feels like it's not going anywhere. It's just stewing in its own misery.
Well, they can't walk there.
They can wheel there. He gets quite good quite good at driving the wheelchair pretty fast.
Yeah.
Now, the bit where that opinion really slammed home for me was what is arguably the big turning point of the film. And you might disagree that it felt shallow, which is what I want to talk about. Brando goes on this upswing, where he's convinced he's going to get his legs to work. He gets a minor setback when he realises, oh no, they're not. They do the prick test, don't they? He then decides to accept it and get married anyway, and decides he's going to stand at the altar. And he obviously has a little bit of a stumble. That's fine. What plays as shallow for me is that one thing basically it functions like an on switch to turn everyone against Brando.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
And I've put here, and I had to write it down.
I think you'll be surprised. I'm probably going to agree a little bit on this front with you.
When they get to their home after the marriage, all of a sudden, it's not done it for the whole film. All of a sudden, the wheelchair squeaks.
Yeah.
And I literally, honestly, I paused the movie and was like, come on. So I've put here, this is the last bit of my stuff that I'll read out. He falls at the altar, then his chair develops a squeak. The leg twitch starts again. Suddenly, the film presents him as monstrous. This comes out of nowhere and feels surface and perfunctory even. What was the point of Ellie's... I've put Ellie, is it Ellie or Ellen?
Ellen.
What was the point of Ellen's whole arc just for her to regret it based on a squeak and a leg tremble?
Yeah, so this is so yeah. Essentially, I agree with you that this is a weird turning point. Now, I kind of liked the turning point, however, it then doesn't play out later. You've got to... Basically, they needed to pick a lane.
Yeah.
And they didn't. They had to pick the route where this scene feels like, where it's like she gets into a relationship with him and she realises this is her whole life, and he's actually becomes more and more monstrous. He actually gets relatively a little bit more aggressive and abusive in this scene. Like, he doesn't hit her per se, but he does grab her quite aggressively.
But it's so quick. This is what I mean by he suddenly becomes monstrous.
It doesn't happen anywhere prior to the run-up. There's no, he's at no point does he grab her violently and go, oh, yeah, sorry, I just got a little bit... it's literally just snap your fingers and now it's happening.
And this is kind of what I mean by cinematically inert.
Yeah.
What this should have been is a build to that. We should have seen flashes of his...
I think the reason was either that... See, I honestly believe there was some rewrite somewhere that took away... Because I actually think... I know we disagree on the walk-around scene at the beginning, but in general, I think the first 2 acts of this film are very well written. I think the script knows what it's doing, and it has something worth saying. It gets to this scene, and then all of a sudden, it changes. So this scene feels like it might still have something to say, though it is throwing squeaky chair and shit in last minute. But I think the idea was that he was probably become more villainous, is the original concept. But then that was decided to be a bit too bad taste.
Yeah,
so what they
which
do,
it is, obviously.
Yeah. So what they do is they reverse it. So he has this dark scene, and then all of a sudden afterwards, we're meant to sympathise with him again. But it doesn't play out properly, because while some of the other storylines still hold true, his storyline is he goes back to the care home, or the veterinary home, and then he has to get booted out because he crashes the car getting drunk. But the storyline is that you're meant to live your life as fully as you can live it. And no matter what that's what the story has been all the way up to this point. He has the argument with Ellen, leaves the family home that she's built for him, and then doesn't speak with her for a while. It seems to be months is meant to have gone by, not having spoken to her. And then when he goes and speaks to the doctor, Dr. Brock, Dr. Brock's advice at this point is just take whatever you can get because, you're not going to get a better option. And it's like, well, that's almost an opposite message to what we were being told earlier.
Is that, I wonder, is that because he's been broken by losing Angel, maybe? Dr. Brock, I mean, has been broken. His faith in his ability to help his patients has been broken.
We needed a bit more understanding of that then. This is, honestly, I think what it is I think, because also I don't think Dr. Brock's speeches or the way he describes things is as smart in that final scene as it is previously.
There's something else in that final scene that I wrote down.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I suppose we'll never know, given how old the film is, whether this is an accident or it's an intentional metaphor.
Go on.
Did you notice that in that last scene, that last conversation between Brock and Brando, there is a whacking big fly buzzing around that office the entire scene? It literally, very noticeable, because it's in black and white, it just appears as a big black dot. Yeah. And it comes past the camera several times. And what I can't work out is that been put there as a metaphor for basically the death of, because I've seen
because it's a shitty scene.
I've seen flies used as a metaphor before in, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called The Informers, but I could be wrong. Years ago, I saw a Bret Easton Ellis film with Amber Heard in it.
Right.
And Amber Heard plays this young rich girl who, in theory, has everything because she's rich and she's young and beautiful. Basically, the world's her oyster, but she's completely hollow inside. And one of the symbolisms they use is when she's on screen, there's a bit where she's sunbathing and she's meant to be desirable. You know, she's young and beautiful and she's sunbathing, so she's not wearing a lot. But there's a fly crawling on her. And it's very deliberately been put there because there's a few close-ups of it. And it symbolises that inside she's rotten.
Right, I see.
And I didn't know if this had been put there as a metaphor.
But then who was rotten?
Brando.
Brando.
Or was there just a fly on set that day and they couldn't get rid of it?
I'll be honest, I think another thing that begs me to believe that this sequence was a rewrite and probably a reshoot is if it's the only scene where the set is terrible.
Right.
So not only is the writing different, not only is Dr. Brock now singing from a different hymn sheet, which doesn't work, but it's the corridor outside that gives it away. When they're walking to his office and then away from his office at the end, look down that fucking corridor. Right. You have never seen a more obvious backdrop in your life.
Right.
Like that corridor is less than the width of your lounge. But they've got a backdrop on it which shows it going into infinity, but the angle is off.
Oh, okay.
So it literally, you're just looking at this backdrop, and it's so clearly a painted 2D backdrop. And you're like, the rest of this film looks really good, like in terms of its sets, because again, they filmed in an actual veterinary hospital. Veterans hospital. Got to stop doing that.
Would this film be better if it had dogs and cats in it?
Yeah.
It was about a dog that had broken its back leg.
People probably care more about a dog called Marlon who's broken its legs than Marlon Brando breaking his legs.
Marlon and me.
Marlon. And then Dr. Brock, that final scene, he's walking him away and then just going to eject him.
Yeah.
Bye, Marlon. Death. But no, so I've put here the few notes that I've got. For me, the script succeeds at tragedy more than it fails at romance. I do feel the romance, which, because they focused on Brando and Ellen, is the main swing of the story. I feel that doesn't work. Because it's not consistent and it doesn't build up. So, again, we get this sequence where suddenly he's a monster to her. And then all of a sudden, she loves him still and we have to feel sympathetic towards him. But it's Brando and he's not a sympathetic kind of actor. Yeah. So, it doesn't work. So, but the quality of the tragedy scenes for me outweigh that, the negativity of the romance. I think Act 3 feels weird in that on the second viewing, because when I watched it the first time, I messaged you a few months ago when I first watched it. I said, Act 3 seems to fall apart. I don't really understand why, but it just doesn't feel as good. So when I watched it this time, I wanted to try and watch and observe what was going wrong with Act 3. Some of it's what I've already explained. I think the vibe I get from Act 3, and I don't know if you felt this way, was the positive ending, quote-unquote, that it tries to push, seems to be that Act 3's acceptance from both the lead characters that they can live long and miserable lives together, which isn't the positivity that that it starts with.
It makes the whole film feel like it's telling disabled people that their lives are going to suck.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
But you can have a long sucky life with someone else at least. But it's like, yeah, again, would have been better with Leo, because here's the other thing with Brando's character, because he's got no real charisma. Brando's character, you don't really sit there and go, oh, come on, I really want him and Ellen to be together, you know. Whereas with Leo, you would want it to work. If you did the Ellen and Leo story instead, you'd be like, you know, because the question is, what does Brando offer her? And I'm not saying that people who are disabled have no value. What I'm saying is in terms of his personality. Because what we've been shown is this darker element. He's constantly depressive, quite abusive. Whereas with Leo, it would be more understandable, because despite the fact that he'd have the same paraplegia, he would be, well, he offers her humour, he offers her, you know, support, he offers her some sort of, you know, and there's growth for him as well, don't get me wrong, but that story would seem to make more sense to me, because he brings something positive in and of himself, because Leo is overall a positive character. And that's not to say if you're depressed from being disabled, you shouldn't deserve long life happiness either. But the film never gets Brando to that positivity either.
Would the film have played differently if a different actor played the Brando role?
So it would depend on how... Because, in some ways, yes. If you had an actor who was a sympathetic, charismatic character. Someone like, I don't know, Robin Williams years later.
Well, thinking of the time period, how about Gregory Peck?
See, Gregory Peck would be better.
Or Farley Granger. Farley Granger was the good guy from Strangers on a Train. The young
Right.
man.
Yeah.
Because Gregory Peck was probably already a bit too old at that point for this
Possibly.
role.
Or John Wayne. No.
He can be the World War One vet that they punch.
Yeah.
I
Honestly,
don't know what it is about Brando. You're right. There just isn't a likable quality to him.
I think the script doesn't help either because it doesn't write.
But any Brando film I've ever seen.
No, I know. But I'm saying with this one, the script. I mean, yeah, you're right. But the script doesn't help him with this because it does. We don't see any hobbies he gains, for example. Like, what positive shit does he do for himself?
I think he's most known for playing bad guys, you know, because I'm sure in Streetcar Named Desire, I'm sure he plays a domestic abuser in that.
He's a good guy in The Wild One, though he's still kind of a bad boy.
He's a biker.
Yeah,
I don't think he's ever been like
a squeaky clean good guy.
He's never been like the Captain America. I don't mean literally a superhero, but yeah, Captain America's like cleaner than clean.
Yeah.
Pearly white teeth, you know. Eat your vegetables, kids. I don't think he's that kind of an actor, is he?
To be fair to Brando, no. I think he prefers characters that have, generally, and certainly for his era, bear in mind, a bit more depth than a Captain America type. I'm not saying Captain America can't have depth, but certainly in his era, when Brando was alive, if you were going to do a Captain America, it would have been bland as shit.
I think, wasn't he quite known, like in his personal life, I mean, Brando's reputation was that he was a bit of a bad boy, wasn't it?
It was, though. It kind of... See, I read different things about Brando. So in some ways, he was very socially conscious. And then in other ways, he was completely selfish and couldn't give a shit. And he seemed to be a man of two very extreme halves.
Didn't he have a lot of marriages as well? Didn't he have like 5 wives and he divorced all of them?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he was a narcissist, perhaps. I could imagine that because of the things I've read where he's, been all about himself. But
I've definitely heard stories from films he did late in his life
where
where
he really
was a
stopped giving a
complete
shit.
and utter dick. I mean, he turned upon Apocalypse Now and refused to learn his lines. And then I know he did a film called The Island of Dr. Moreau in 96. I think it's one of his last films.
He insisted on wearing a bin on his head or something?
Something like that, yeah. And he apparently greatly delayed the filming because he kept throwing temper tantrums.
Yeah.
And...
So for everything I hear, he wasn't necessarily a very nice guy. But then
celebrity not being a nice guy. Never heard a vote like that
certainly
before.
Bear in mind, you had the diva issue at this point in Hollywood. You don't get a lot of divas in modern Hollywood actors because they're just people haven't got the time for it. Yeah. It's like we're busy making a production. If you're going to be a bitch, can you whether you're a man or a woman? If you're going to be a bitch, can you fuck off? Yeah. Those people don't get repeat gigs. Whereas in this time period, people like Marlon Brando could be shitty if they wanted to be, and they'd still get work because they're the celebrity. There was a lot more...
Star.
Yeah, there was a lot more star power.
Star power doesn't mean anything anymore.
No, not really.
It really doesn't. We learnt about this at uni because it used to be that you could sell a film based entirely on the star name.
Yeah.
And there is lots and lots of evidence, like actual physical numerical evidence, proving that that's no longer the case. Yeah. Tom Cruise films, it's not a guarantee anymore having Tom Cruise's name on the poster.
The Mummy didn't work.
The Mummy didn't work. Will Smith, he used to be one. It used to be that Are you telling me, honestly, that if it wasn't Will Smith, anyone would have watched Wild Wild West except for complete and utter fucking nerds? They wouldn't have, would they?
No, you are 100% correct.
But it was massive. iRobot probably as well.
Yeah.
But because they had the Will Smith name on them, and back then he was one of the biggest stars in the world...
He was that era's version of The Rock.
Yeah.
In terms of you could just stick him in anything and it would sell.
Yeah, and it's kind of like Tarantino said. I think it was Tarantino. There are no movie stars anymore.
The Rock, I would say,
characters. The characters they play are the stars. So he was on about he was specifically referring to
is the antithesis of that because he only ever plays The Rock.
Yeah, he was specifically referring to Marvel. To be fair,
sure.
Where he basically was saying, I'm going to pick on him, but he was saying Chris Hemsworth is not a movie star. Thor is a movie star. People go to see Thor. But if you were to recast Thor, yeah, you'd get some people being like, oh, I wish it was still Chris Hemsworth. But that's not going to stop them going to see Thor.
I think that's more of a product of how big the Marvel and Disney brands are, that they could basically swap him out with anyone and give it enough money. But you say that, but they've tried things like the Marvels where they gave it a huge marketing push and it still didn't sell as well as the expectation at the very least. I'm talking purely about the idea that they're just characters that, you know, have Marvel Disney money as their marketing push, and the film still failed. Whereas it's very unlikely back in the 90s, in the 60s, in the 50s, if you had a big name, the film would probably sell anyway. That doesn't really happen anymore. And again, superhero movies are going down the toilet in terms of their profitability.
Yeah. So it's Star Wars.
Yeah.
Disney, it was just in the news
They've
today.
overegged the pudding.
It was just in the news today. Disney have officially admitted that the Star Wars train is kind of on the downswing, because apparently even the merchandising sales are dropping, which that hasn't happened since Star Wars was invented. Even when we had that massive gap between like Episode 3 and when Disney bought the rights to it.
Yeah.
Where there were no new Star Wars movies, the merchandise has always sold well.
There's two elements. Number one,
it's overexposed.
Well, no. So in terms of merchandising specifically, number one, people had more money back then. Unfortunately, we're in a recession, a long-term recession. People don't buy as much, haven't got the expendable cash. Number two, the other issue is, and not necessarily for Star Wars, but certainly, for example, Star Trek toys have had this problem for a while. People don't buy them as much. Why aren't people buying Discovery toys as much as they would have bought, you know, next-gen toys, etc.? I'll tell you why. Because your shit looks boring. When you design everything to look like an iPad, that's no longer interesting to a child, because guess what they've got? An iPad. So you're selling a character that has a, like, you know, let's build the Enterprise, but this time it looks like an iPad. I've got an iPad. You know, the whole reason that the Enterprise in the 60s looked so interesting, or in the 80s when it was next gen, it looked interesting was because it was an interface and a style of system that you couldn't buy for your home. It looked alien. Now everyone is trying to take, you know, alien spaceships and make them look like the Apple Store. They literally did that in Star Trek 09. That was the design process. Let's try and make it look like an Apple Store.
The new TARDIS in Doctor Who.
Yeah. And the thing is, I'm sorry, it's boring. And it's not just boring because the problem is you've got a bunch of millennials, people our age, now being able to run shows and going, oh, I loved the iPad when it came out. Let's design it to look like something I thought was really cool. And then all the kids are like, that's bollocks, I've got one. They've had one since I was 1. You know, the 15th version of the iPad was what I had when I was 2 years old, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, this isn't fun.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be that guy. Another Jamie hot take. Apple's never been cool. It's always looked garbage.
Yep, I know, 100% agree.
I hate their design aesthetic. I hate the interface. Anyway, I don't really have much more to say about the men. Do you have anything else you'd like to point out?
No, not really. I just stay true to the fact that I think the film is still quite good. The first act and second act are pretty good. The third act is a bit shit. And the film would have overall been a much, much better experience if Leo was the lead and not Marlon Brando's character. That's my take on it. If I was to remake this, quote unquote, I would focus more on the Leo character and make him the lead, because it's just a more interesting character and one that's got more ability to have a positive conclusion.
Fair play, fair play. Well, that's it for another episode of Second Take Cinema. Thank you for listening. Please do like, share, subscribe, etc., etc. If you feel like checking out our other shows, we also do VGMP, the Video Game Movie Podcast, where we review video game-based movies. And we also have Haunted, the audio drama, which is our X-Files meets Doctor Who style long-form horror, mystery, adventure series. All available on all good podcatcher apps. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time for another Second Take.